Hey there, my name is Anthony Romano, and I'm going to tell you in this video the best muscle building exercises for a ketogenic diet. Now, many people look at the ketogenic diet as solely a fat loss tool, and it primarily is used for that, but there's a lot of other benefits that come with it. And one possibility that's open to you is muscle building, especially if you're doing it in a lean manner. And I have other videos on my page of, keto bulks and simultaneous keto cutting with, tertiary goals of muscle building. But the main point of this video is I'm going to tell you the workout approaches that are most conducive to muscle building on a keto dieting protocol. Whether you're doing it for your baseline of the year, which is kind of how I do it, or whether you're doing it as part of a, relatively short-term cutting protocol. So, if you're interested in keto bodybuilding, as many of the other videos on my page will demonstrate, nutrition is a very important part of the puzzle, okay? And you can watch my other videos on the golden era nutrition protocols that are relative to keto. Example, my collaborations with Golden Era Bookworm, where we talk about Vince Gironda's protocols, his nutritional protocols, the steak and eggs diets, right? The 36 egg a day approach, which you don't necessarily have to do entirely, but there is some benefit to incorporating high quality eggs into a keto bulk, whether you're a vegetarian, whatever it may be. But nutrition plays a role. But I'm here to just talk about the training aspects of this because, there's a million ways to do a ketogenic diet and you can do it whatever way you like. This video is going to apply to you no matter what kind of keto diet you prefer. But when we're talking about building muscle on keto, the best exercises are going to be ones that I'll specify in a moment, but I'm going to start off by saying the general category they fall under. So of course, you're always going to want this sort of emphasis of focus on the compound exercises. So this is the multi-joint exercises. This is your bench press. This is your, row exercises. But some of the most important exercises are always going to be, the weighted pull-up, the weighted dip, the incline bench, and any sort of heavy rowing exercise or a lat pull exercise. And the most important one, surprisingly, in my experiences, at least in the experience of some of the people I've helped, are the weighted pull-ups and weighted dips. These are the exercises that truly can transform your physique. Now, I'm going to explain the theory behind this and where the isolation exercises fit in. But you're going to want to treat compounds and isolations like a cake. Isolations are your icing, okay? And I know I'm talking about keto, and this is getting kind of funny because, it's a food that you would never really be having in such a diet, but the compounds are your foundation. The compounds is the cake. The isolations are the icing on top. But funny enough, a lot of people like the icing. A lot of people, take a swig of the icing. Because down the line, the more experience you get, once you have a cake, once you've built up the foundations and done enough compounds and built up your strength and multi-joint, context, you can really focus on the icing, okay? And I'm pretty proud of that analogy because I just thought of it now. But the point here is that in the beginning, for newbie type trainees, you're going to want to focus more so on the compounds. And you see so many different people. I've seen a billion different guys that are skinnier, younger, less experienced in the gym, and they're doing just bicep curls all the time. Meanwhile, they're using 20 pounds or they're trying to force 30 pounds. But in reality, they can't press a 50-pound barbell over their head, not even anything like that. So the point is, I'm not roasting these people. I'm not being overly critical. The point is, you need to have a cake before you can focus on the icing, right? Nobody likes gravy without, Thanksgiving dinner, okay? But if you have Thanksgiving dinner, you can really douse everything in gravy. These things kind of potentiate one another. And once you're at a point where you have a foundation, you have this cake, you've built up some strength and you've built up some mass with the compounds, the isolations gain more importance. So the main focus of any muscle building protocol is always going to be, time under tension and the overload principle. And when we're talking about nutrition, it's always going to be positive nitrogen balance. This is the number one key, especially when you combine it with, adequate training stimulus, which is essentially overload principle and time under tension, as far as for bodybuilding purposes. I have other videos where I talk about lactate threshold, and this is essentially another key, but I'm going to focus primarily on the exercises themselves, because all you need to know is get enough protein, right, which may entail enough calories, especially if you're doing some sort of keto bulk. But if you're doing any sort of keto maintenance diet, any sort of keto cutting diet, you really want to prioritize the multi-joint exercises, because especially as you gain adaptation, your body gains this very effective ability to train intensely. It's seriously something that changes dramatically for people after they get fat adapted. So I highly recommend that you stick with this no matter what your goal is with a ketogenic diet. But the primary takeaway here is, no matter what your purpose is, as long as your protein is high enough, right? But you don't want to throw off your ratios to the point where you're, 50% protein, that's way too high. You want enough fat in your body to essentially digest that protein. And once you get to a point where you can have an adequate positive nitrogen balance, it doesn't matter if you take, a classic bodybuilding approach. It doesn't matter if you take a vegetarian approach. It doesn't matter if you take, a moderate calorie approach. As long as you have the positive nitrogen balance, so a slightly elevated protein intake, as long as you have training stimulus, so, time under tension, and overload principle, so continual strength increases, especially at these compound lifts, you can incorporate the weighted pull-ups, weighted dips, and slowly increase your strength on those. These are the ones that change people's physiques like mad. And especially because of a quote which a friend of mine told me when I was in New Zealand, which is bodybuilding is all about angles. Okay, this is a quote from my friend Marjan, who is, very experienced bodybuilder in New Zealand. And I remember one thing Marjan told me, which is, like I said, bodybuilding is all about angles, because even if you're doing these compounds, even if you're doing, multi-joint exercises, let's say the pushing exercises, right? The difference between a bench press and an overhead press is dramatic. And the difference between, a flat bench and an incline bench is also dramatic. And besides the fact that people have different preferences over, shoulder position or where they have irritations, etc., the point is this applies to almost every single exercise. So when you take, the situation of a weighted pull-up, it's slightly different than the distribution of weight with a lat pull. Okay, you have your entire body weight, and with a lat pull, any sort of pulley-based machine, you have this constant resistance going on. But if you can kind of, stretch this natural body weight and add on like several plates, this is a weight that your body realistically never has experienced, because it's your body weight, which most people are generally able to handle, plus something a little bit extra. Okay, and let me give the example of a weighted dip. Perhaps this will be a better scenario to explain. When we're talking about bench press, I know a lot of guys who can bench press crazy numbers, like, not crazy, but like, very impressive bench press numbers, like multiple plates, and these guys can put up a flat bench like it's nothing. But then when it comes to weighted dips, these guys with a slightly different angle, or something a little bit more bent forward, right? These guys cannot do more than a single plate plus their body weight, especially if they don't even crack 200 pounds. Now for me, I've done multiple plate, dip exercises, multiple plate pull-up exercises, but it's something to do with the slight angle variation that you can't really hit. Example, I'm going to, kind of give you a body position here. If we're talking about a bench press, right? You're flat and you're pushing, right? And I realize the, shirt I'm wearing is kind of just drowning out everything, but flat bench compared to a, dip position, you have like this position. Your shoulder is farther back, you have more stretch in the chest, and it's a part of your chest that's being activated that essentially isn't normally activated. So even though you've already built up a chest, let's say somebody who can do, 200 pounds or 225 pounds, 2 plates, they can press that no problem. But when their chest is stretched, and when their chest is at the point where it's in a position where it's not normally worked. Of course, you got to be careful, but you can take advantage of this. You can take advantage of the position where your chest is not normally stretched and getting this level of range of motion, and then exposing it to overload in positions where it's not used to, but of course is safe to do so. So, the tried and true weighted pull-up, weighted dip, these are exercises that have been around for a long time, especially with specific variations like those classic bodybuilding variations, like the Gironda slightly angled dip, right? And the point of this is the dip, the pull-up, and other compound exercises are key when you use weight beyond your body weight. And when we're talking about isolations, you're then going to follow up with every isolation like it's icing on the cake. Like you've, tried to progressively increase, I'm going to increase my weighted pull-up, I'm going to increase my weighted dip. And then from there, if it's chest day and you've just done weighted dips, you're every week going to try to beef that up. And then after that exercise in the gym on that particular day, that's the day where you start sprinkling gravy on everything. You start, hitting the lighter exercises to burn out. But again, prioritize those big compound lifts. You want to build a bigger cake, right? You can put all the icing you want on, you're not going to improve the mass of that cake. Very strange analogy, but I think it nails home the point here. You got to have a turkey before you put some gravy on it. And you're the turkey. Either way, the most important exercises for building muscle on a ketogenic diet are compound exercises, in addition to the right nutritional context. But I personally believe the weighted pull-up and weighted dip are the biggest ones, at least for upper body. Of course, I can get into my personal preferences, for example, legs. And to give you the spoiler, my personal preference for legs is any sort of front squat or hack squat, because I'm a big believer in building up the front quads to kind of, avoid widening the waist, at least if you're somebody who believes in the classic bodybuilding values. But actually, if you want to learn more about that, go to my friend Carlos Golden Era Bookworm's YouTube page and learn about those things. But as far as we're talking about upper body, compound lifts, because especially whether you're somebody who's advanced or whether you're somebody who's new, you're going to get more bicep gain out of building up that weighted pull-up from a narrow angle, right? Because these exercises entail more than one variation. Of course, you got the wide one. Of course, you have, the standard weighted dip. But you can change the angles of these things. You can go wider. You can go narrower, right? And there's different stretching going on. It's all about the range of motion and the time under tension. And one of the worst pieces of advice I got 8-9 years ago was somebody who, it was one of those guys on YouTube who, I'm not going to say his name, but this guy was just yoked out of his mind. And it was very clear now that when you look back on time, this guy was using, steroids and stuff. And, I don't have a problem with that, but I don't use them myself. And nor have I ever. So, the point is, this guy was giving advice that worked for him, saying, don't train isolations. I don't do biceps, right? Even though this guy's biceps were bigger than my head at the time, and I'm 15, 16. Listen to this. So for years, I didn't train biceps as intensely because I thought, this guy says don't train isolations, don't train biceps. You need to train both. You need the cake and you need the icing. Things are pretty boring without the icing. It's just that the cake is more important. And I had received false advice in many years in the past stating that you only need the cake. And listen, you need both, because you need to build the foundation, and you will get plenty of size gain from focusing 80% on the compounds and 20% on the isolations. And funny enough, ironically, once you have that foundation, the 20% that you do put into isolations is going to actually produce more of that 80% results if you're a believer in the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule, which you can't really choose to be a believer in. It's a universal law of nature. But the point is, focus on the compounds, and then once you've built a cake, focus on the isolations. And for advice that I've gotten in the past, which is, don't worry about isolations, you need both, but you got to build up the stabilizer muscles. You have to build up the muscles that are going to support you in those isolations. For example, one of my favorite isolation exercises is the lateral raise all the way to the top. And this is an isolation I've taken from a 1940s bodybuilder named Alan Steven, who actually, again, Golden Era Bookworm has a great video on. But this guy was so strong because, 1940s bodybuilders and strongmen were just built differently for reasons which I may explain in future videos. But this guy was able to lateral raise 60, 70 pounds, no problem, and with per arm, okay? And even though I can do 30 to 40 pounds with that, this is just unreal numbers. And the way that you get the ability to do that is by building up the weighted pull-up, is by building up the weighted dip, because you're building up these stabilizer muscles that are functioning in the background, right? You got to set the stage before you throw on the actors, before you throw on the actual movie in motion, right? More strange metaphors, but it paints a picture in your head, doesn't it? So build up the stabilizer muscles by building up these compounds, by building up the cake. And last thing I'll say to put the icing on the cake of that analogy where this certain bodybuilder was saying not to work on isolations is that I regret that decision. Of course you want to focus on building the cake, but don't neglect the icing. And overall, down the line as time goes on, you'll notice after building up your weighted dip and your weighted pull-up, one thing I notice is that my bicep curl ability, my isolation curl ability exploded. I'm curling 60-pound dumbbells. And, I'd like to attribute certainly these things to, higher fat soluble vitamin content in my diet. Of course, other nutritional factors, right? And the fact that I try to avoid excess inflammation, other things like that through the ketogenic diet, etc., and procure high quality foods. But the point is, when you focus on these, under-focused compound movements, like the weighted pull-up and the weighted dip, you're going to target areas of your upper body, and of course your lower body, that you don't normally hit. And you're going to expose them to levels of tension which you're not used to. You're going to overload them as time goes on, and you'll notice the strength will go up very quickly because the rest of your chest is able to accommodate heavier weights. So your body's going to catch up quickly, except this is an area that doesn't normally get stimulated, right? As I was saying before, the flat bench, if you can press 2 plates with that, and then you start doing some weighted dips, you might not be able to crack 1 plate, right? Depending on your body weight. But give it a week or two, and you'll be able to crush it no problem. And you'll be looking back like, what the hell? Why was I able to gain so much strength so quickly with this? And it's because your body and your central nervous system is adapted to pressing heavier weights relative to your body weight. And it simply has to realize that this is a stressor your muscles are going to have to take on. That's essentially how the muscular system works in that way, because a lot of this is influenced by your central nervous system and what it's used to pushing. This is why you might know some people who are just skinny as hell or something, and they could just push massive weight because these people have a very strong central nervous system. But this was a theoretical video, and I rambled a lot. But the point is, weighted pull-ups, weighted dips, and then this sort of 80-20 fixation on compounds and then isolations, but never neglecting one or the other, using the cake as the compounds and the icing as the isolations. And once you've built the cake, the more cake you have, the more icing you can put on, the more fondant, if you've ever seen Cake Boss. But that's how you know I have to go to sleep, because I threw out the word fondant, and you know that once the word fondant has been thrown out in a ketogenic diet video, things have gone too far. So, like this video, subscribe to my page, and let me know if you're interested in any other similar topics with keto muscle building, and watch my other playlists on keto performance, which I'll probably have to set up in the next day or two. But beyond that, let me know if you're interested in keto group coaching. DM me and follow my Instagram. And, besides that, ask me any questions you want me to talk about. I'm always answering people, and I very much appreciate the support. So thank you again. My name is Anthony Romano. Peace.